can get Kurt to, thank you, join us. Yeah. Good morning. I'm going to call the meeting to order. The next item is an executive session. I'd like to entertain a motion that we reconvene in executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will meet in the other room in executive session and reconvene following that conversation. Thank you all. We will reconvene, and thank you all who are watching us remotely and in the audience for your patience. Very much appreciate our opportunity to chat with legal counsel. Item 2, cash flow burn rate. Mr. Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a topic that we have really been looking at internally. I'm sorry, did we skip some?
Meeting somewhere?
I was handed an agenda that I just do what they tell me to. So let's, my apologies, someone's actually looking at the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of July 16th.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. RTA current plan and RTA next. And as we begin to evaluate the plan and where we're going, I think it might be interesting to have a cash flow evaluation.
Perfect.
And we'll turn it over to, is that safe?
That's perfect.
Mr. Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's a great recovery, by the way. So good job. So this is the conversation that we started last time. You heard some of the commentary that I made, and a lot of it really focused on, okay, how do we get the projects that are currently outlined in RTA 1 and proposed in RTA next complete? So although we're going to put a lot of energy and effort into the RTA 1 here in a bit, I think it's important that we look at the opportunity for us to deliver and what does that look like. And I think there's a couple things I want to bring to your attention. We've put a lot of focus on the financial piece, right? There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of analysis, a lot of discussion around the dollars, purely the dollars. But then there's a corresponding component that's just as important, and that's the delivery. Our ability to actually get projects out the door, and what does that look like and what does that mean? And so we had this conversation at the board. We've had this conversation with TMC. I reached out to ATB, went and met with them and posed the question. If we were to bring $150 million a year in projects, would you be able to handle those? They assured me, which I expected them to, they assured me that they could, right? So that one is done, if you will. We have a commitment from that organization. The next conversation is really with the consulting engineers, which, I'm going to reach out to ACEC out of, they've got a presence here, and make sure that the consulting engineers are on board and they can deliver and go through that process. I'm expecting the same answer from them, that they have capacity, that they can do it, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to hear that from them. I want to be able to tell you with confidence that yes, they have confirmed that. Okay. The third area, which is really we'll call it on the planning side of this, is something that's really where you come in terms of organizing yourselves to address whatever the challenges are of delivery. And so we're going to go around and we're going to have conversations with you all as well and say, okay, you as entities, you've got a lot on your plate, but what is your commitment and what does that look like? And quite frankly, what do you need from the RTA in order to bring forward the delivery of the program? The fourth area, and these aren't in order necessarily, but the fourth area that is of what I'll call significant concern is our right-of-way acquisition. And what does that look like? How do we go from many, many years on some projects to a very shortened period of time, like a year or 18 months for right-of-way acquisition? And so there's only a finite number of people, as I understand it, that do that business in the region. But we need to have a conversation. We need to have an understanding of what does that entail, but also what can we do? What can the RTA do? And when I say the RTA, I'm not talking about the people sitting in the back of the room. I'm talking about us. What do we do to shore up that effort? Because if you look at the schedules, some of those have taken years and years to acquire right-of-way. And some of it is very complex, especially when you're talking about dealing with the railroad and some of the other things. But we want to make sure that there's clarity in the conversation so that those pieces all make sense. And I haven't addressed the environmental. That's obviously a constraint out there, but that I put under the design side. So the consultants are really the ones that can help us with maneuvering through that. So now let's get into what I'll call the bottom line here. So I'm gonna turn it over to the staff to outline for you what the dollars look like in terms of the cash flow. In other words, if we were to take all the dollars that we have in the bank and all the new money from an RTA Next, what would our burn rate, our utilization rate have to be on a monthly basis for the 20 years, the 25 years that we expect this program to last? So with that, I'll turn it over. Who's going to address that? Is that you, James, or is that? Okay, we'll start with James.
Thank you, Mike, Madam Chair. So unlike the first RTA, RTA Next will start with an infusion of projects from the previous plan. So the 4 deferreds and then whatever's remaining in the current tip. Thanks. Thanks, Mike. And then we have the current plan with a lot of front loading of projects itself. So the first 5 years or so have cash flows of $300 or $400 million a year. And so this region traditionally, looking at the 19 years of the current RTA, we've had months where we can maybe exceed $3 or $4 million, but not consistently. The best years we had were 2016, 2017, where the roadway element maybe expended $50 million. So if we look at it based on the way the TIP is programmed and the front-loaded projects in RTA Next, monthly burn rates in those first 4 or 5 years would be between $20 and $35 million a month. So it's a difficult, it's very ambitious, and it seems it's not consistent with the way that the first RTA performed as far as expenditures. So what I put together, you said you have that? You have a handout? Really?
Is it electronic?
It's the blue one.
Tim has had to drop off, but Jeff is still with us.
Yep.
53 this year. With these big numbers, really.
People like me say 53 is going on.
53 is showing off according to some members of the board.
I meant only to.
Little did you know you get whacked this
Yeah,
first.
geez.
Just trying
Sensitivities out there.
trying to be nice.
So if we attempt to adjust those burn rates into kind of a more reasonable spread over the 20 years, even with that effort, it's still highly ambitious. So what we did was we spread out the current fund balance, which at the end of fiscal 26 is projected to be about $420 million for RTA current projects. And that's not including any roll from the 26 budget, where we'll just assume for the sake of this exercise that all of those dollars are expended. So we start with that $420 million fund balance, and we spread it out over 6 years. We roll TPT from the new plan over a 6-year period. We do the same with STBG, even though it doesn't officially roll. Those dollars just wouldn't be expended in those years. So we would reduce that to about $8 million a year. And we did the same thing with the HERF 12.6. And this is all, the STBG and HERF are all in the current tip, but they would linger into 2032 with this cash flow. So even with this cash flow and the regional dollars going out to 2032, we're still looking at a monthly burn rates of $12 million every month. So after that period, then we're reliant solely on TPT, on excise tax. As you can see, we're still required to burn $12 million a month until we get to period 3 in 2037. And at that point, it drops to $9 million a month, which is still more than double our best months during the first RTA. And then finally, in period 4, late in period 4, our monthly burn rate would drop to 8.4 million. So this is what we would have to expend over 20 years to get the program completed in 20 years. And so again, just for your consideration, if you compare it to the burn rates of the current RTA, they don't align well. So.
Thank you, James. So go ahead, Shane. Jan had to step out, so I guess I'll take over. Go for it. So I wanted to just point this out. There's a couple of things that we need to pay attention to here. So I already talked about one, which is, our ability to deliver and just how do we do this? How do we get this out the door? And I've got a lot of confidence in the team's ability, meaning we all in this room, to do this, right? And to move this forward. But there's also a conversation that should be had with regard to the front loading, right? There's a lot of front loading that's going on here, and understandable, right? There's a lot of projects that need to get done. There's a lot of needs out there that need to get done. But you can see from the burn rate what that looks like in those first 2 periods. There's a pretty substantial amount, which is about 3 times, if not more, than what we're currently burning. So if we really look at the utilization of about $3 to $4 million a year currently, and we increase that by 3 times per month for basically those first 10 years, that's what we're talking about here. So I thought it was important to talk through this with you, so that you understand what we're looking at for that comment. Go ahead, James. Did you have something?
I just wanted to add one more thing. So to date, year 19, we have expended about $1.4 billion if we include the supplanted HERF since 2020. These first 6 years would expend about the same amount. So it's triple.
Yeah. So it's basically 3 times the, go ahead, Bill. That's correct.
What would think the maximum annual burn rate that was expended during the 20 years? Or we had a lower or higher pace than we have been else?
Much lower. We peaked around 2016, 2017.
At what burn rate?
Those I believe those years were about $50 million a year for roadway.
So do the math. It's just over 4. It's not even 5. Yeah. So what does all this mean, right? We had a conversation, and let me kind of bring this back to all the conversations we're having about RTA 1 as well, right? So the 4 projects that are included in RTA Next are right out of the chute, right? So we've assumed that would happen right out of the chute. The second thing, though, is we've had conversations about potential bonding, debt service. And so, okay, let's have a discussion about what the infusion of cash is to make this happen. This is the expenditure side, basically. So what does the infusion of cash, need to be in order to make sure we get those projects delivered? And, there's a whole conversation around that, but I wanted to kind of present it to you. We wanted to present it to you so that you can see we've got concerns about the magnitude of what we're really tasked with doing. And when you're up at 3 times, that's pretty significant.
I'm sorry, Terry.
Madam Chair, I think this is the crux of what I've been concerned about now for some time. And it's interesting that, Mike, you brought up a conversation with ATB, and it's great that ATB says, yeah, we can deliver. We would expect them to do that, right? I do think, however, because I had a pretty lengthy conversation with Alejandro Angel from SOMAS yesterday, and it was a really beneficial conversation from the standpoint that Alejandro was able to provide some context to this very concern in this issue. We had a pretty lengthy discussion about it. And I think what gives me a little bit of comfort is the number that he came up with was right in line with what James has presented here today. And he stated with great confidence and gave, I think, substance to his confidence that was a little bit reassuring to me. And I don't know if it would make any sense to have the experts in their fields come before this group. I think probably the sooner the better. ATB, so Ms. Alejandro or somebody else like Alejandro who can speak to these issues for us and convey to us why they believe this is realistic. Because from a layman looking at this, multiplying this number by 3 or 4 doesn't seem doable to me. But they seem to really believe, and like I said, the additional conversation that we had made me more comfortable with that idea.
You go to Shane and then Bill.
I'm not quite sure why we would question the industry. I think it's a worthy question to put out there. I would expect that our contractors, our builders, our suppliers would exude great confidence in their ability to deliver these projects. I'm reassured by hearing this. But what in our past, over the last 20 years, dictates to us that that's the problem? That's why we haven't been able to deliver our projects on time. I don't know if I can point to anything that way. I think we need to be asking ourselves as agencies, do we have the capacity to deliver these, this number of projects and get them out and bid out? I have a feeling based off of your comments that if they're out on the street for bid, we're going to have people bidding on them and we're going to get the projects done. So I just wonder if we're asking ourselves the right questions. I echo Terry's concerns and that I think that we're obligated to be recommending a plan that we have confidence that we can deliver.
Yeah.
And therein lies a lot of my concerns when we consider RTA next, and not just the scope of those projects, but the sheer number of those projects and what we've been able to do this last 20 years versus what we can do in the future 20 years. So thanks.
And Bill, and it's just about us. I'm remembering when you say that, Shane, it was at the last meeting when we were standing with with General Maxwell, and the comment was, yes, a lot of these suppliers, a lot of the folks have left, but they will come back. And so I was focusing, as you said, on what will it take, but the recognition of what has occurred in the last 20 years that's allowed them to leave. And what are we doing differently that will in fact draw them back? Bill? I'm sorry.
As it relates to the question about whether or not the consulting engineers would have adequate capacity to be able to pick up the load, major change in the last 20 years, the number of small private or small locally owned firms versus national firms, much higher number of locally owned firms at the time than now. They're much more nationally owned firms. The nationally owned firms, whether they're good or bad, and I'm now part of a nationally owned firm, whether they're good or bad, the nationally owned firms have the ability to be able to put resources to a job, even if they're not local, but they also have the resources to be able to bring people to Tucson to fill jobs here. And that was something that I didn't have when we were a local firm. And so I would agree with Angel. The likelihood of us being able to gear up to be able to handle that load is strong. I would also agree with Shane. I don't think it was the consulting engineers or the contractors that were holding things back in the past.
Thank you. And thank you that the recognition of how the market has changed in 20 years is significant. And I'm going to go to Bob and then we'll go to Terry and Sam.
Chair, I think we need to also include Mike and ATB and ACEC. I think you need to maybe have some discussions with the utility service providers. Okay, the dry utility service provider, power, gas, because they have situations where they've got to do major relocations in some instances. And that is one of the impacts that we ran into in the last 20 years is to accommodate or have them accommodate the changes we've got.
Thank you. Terry?
So I totally agree with Shane, that, it probably is not, the engineering folks is probably not the builders. It probably lies someplace else. And I hadn't thought about the utilities, Bob, so thank you for that. And that's true because that did, result in some delays on a recent project that we had. So, I think the benefit in doing this is, to have the assurance and know exactly where. So we eliminate the things that clearly are not the impediments and the obstacles. And then we can narrow and focus on those things that have been during the last 20 years and figure out how we close the gap. That's my thought.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to get back to the point of this conversation and ask Mike the feedback you need. Are we getting into talking about, do we need the debt service? Or are we talking about maybe we have too many projects and we need to talk about reducing the number of projects in order to deliver? I just want to make sure we're really getting to the point here.
So I would answer your question as no and yes, right? Based purely on what we're looking at here, I think there's an argument, and I think we haven't even gotten to the cash flow yet. I think Roy's going to do that here in a minute. But I think the conversation really is, do we have too many projects and are we just too optimistic in trying to get them all done? Now, having said that, it looks like there'll be winners and losers there, right? That's not my intent. My intent is to say, what do we do to deliver this? Now, one thing that I asked the staff to think about is this uses a 20-year horizon, right? So this is a 20-year horizon based on all of the projects, all of the money expended in 20 years. Well, okay, let's put a tail on that. Okay, let's assume that the ramp up tail for new money is about 5 years. So the ramp down tail is about 5 years. So if you divide this by 25, right, that helps, but it doesn't come close to what we're doing now. And so those numbers are staggering. They're still pretty high. So I think that I'm educating the team to answer your question directly on a broader scale. And I don't disagree with you, Shane. I think there's a variety of reasons why the delivery is what it is. But I think that what's important is the entirety of the region has to be around this. And that's everybody, and including the utilities, including you all and the contractors and the consultants, and everybody's sitting around the table saying, okay, how do we get to this point where we can deliver this and we have confidence and everybody understands their role? Of course, people that, can you handle it? Of course, they're going to say you can, right? It's like, well, time out here, because is that really true? And what does that mean? So yeah, we may get bidders, but if the cost, because we're infusing so much work in the first period, does the cost go up because we have too much work? And now we're starting to, people can be more picky, if you will. And well, that ratchets up the cost. That doesn't help us. We're going the wrong way. So that's why, I started checking these off. I don't disagree with you. One of the things I heard from ATB was our procurement rules, right? I'm like, okay, let's talk through those. But it's okay to have a discussion about that. Do the procurement rules, are we okay there, or could that stand some review, right? But I already talked about the right of way, and I don't think we should discount that, because when we have projects that require right of way, especially in commercial areas, that is really, really tough, and it takes a long time. Does it take 5 years or 3 years? Shouldn't, man, but it has. So I'm sorry. And it burns a ton of money, and the longer we wait, it burns even more money, right? So I think this is a healthy conversation. I think it's important because it really educates you, which then helps inform some of the other conversations we're having about delivery and all things going on. So I'd like, who's going to talk about are you talking cash flow?
I can
Have at
I
it.
can address the cash flow as well.
Why don't we do that? Do we have another?
We do have another sheet.
We're into handouts and spreadsheets. We like Excel, so you'll like it too.
Oh, good.
Sorry. We gave you.
Let me retract my.
Under the age of 25. No, you don't even have it right
It's
size.
slightly small. I think as you're getting this really small print, we tried to show you the entirety of the program. It's hard to do when you're coming out 20 years, otherwise we'd have multiple pages. So you don't have to worry about all the fine print. You know, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Trust me, I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. But I think it's the concept, the kind of overall picture that James is going to go over that I think is important there. So go ahead, James.
Well, thanks, Mike, Madam Chair. So if you look at the kind of midway down the sheet, you'll see total expenditures and ending cash balance. So as I mentioned a minute ago, you can see the total expenditures by year ramp up to 256 million in 27, 242 and 28, 296, 29. And then in fiscal 30, they go up to almost 400 million. So in fiscal 30, our monthly burn rate would have to be about $33 million. And of course, that's a combination of RTA current, what's left in the tip, deferred projects, and of course, whatever is front loaded in the next plan. And then if we look at fiscal 31, because of the front loading and the massive budgets and roll from previous RTA, then we have to bond. So we can't have budgets without fiscal constraints. So we'll have to bond beginning in fiscal 31, and that goes all the way out to fiscal 43. So not only does that, it's an unrealistic cash flow and burn rate, but it also places us in a debt situation where we're paying millions of dollars in interest on bond money. So if you go back to the previous cash flow, it's more realistic and it prevents us from having to bond. It's still very ambitious, but I'm not saying one's correct and the other isn't. But if we take a more spread out over time approach, we can avoid bonding, which in our analysis, we do not believe is ever going to be necessary based on even ambitious burn rates. We would never go anywhere near $35 million a month in expenditures.
Thank you, James. So again, trying to educate you, trying to give you as much information, much data on this so that you, when you're having conversation about bond indebtedness, when you're having conversations about what period the projects are, you can see the impact it has. And what we're trying to do here is give you a holistic view of the entirety of the program. And again, I keep going back to the dollars that we have in the bank are included here, right? So we're showing what those fund balances do, if you will, but it also is what are the projects that are left to complete. Because remember, the RTA Next plan is one piece, it's a snapshot, but then we have to add the completion of RTA Next. And the RTA Next, the completion of RTA 1. And the RTA 1 does both. It has money associated with it. And, we've already gone through that. And we'll go through that again. But also it's the delivery side. It's the expenditure side and our ability to get these projects out the door. That is really what we're trying to focus on here.
Questions, comments?
And Madam Chair, I obviously don't expect you to, we're giving you this information, which is like literally hot off the presses. We're not expecting you to give us a yay or nay on this. We're again educating you on the magnitude of what we're dealing with here and what I think we have to be paying attention to. You got to.
Thank you. And I just keep trying to balance in my head lessons we've learned and not forgetting those, it feels a little bit sometimes like we've said, we are choosing to look at how we're going to spend in the future, what the expenditures will be and what the revenues will be without really being informed by our experience over the last 20 years completely. And I hope we keep that. Terry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. I understand this is an exercise here, but if the 4 deferred projects are going to be in the RTA Next, it doesn't list those. So where do those come into play here? Is there up there? Oh, I'm sorry. Totally missed those. Sorry.
They're right there. So, Madam Chair, if there are no questions on the spreadsheet, I'd like to go back and have a conversation that's been rattling around, at least in my head, about completion of RTA 1. I'm sorry.
Just real quick before we jump, please. Is it unfair to hope or to ask that RTA staff take a stab at like a recommendation on how this should play out?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to identify, hey, we obviously, I think we can see that there's something's gotta happen here. But for staff to come forward with various scenarios about how projects play out in the different periods. I know that the three smaller entities here made a recommendation of maybe having everything done in the first 3 periods. So you had that 4th period to actually make sure everything gets done. Is that realistic? Is there part of that that's realistic? I mean, the number of projects doesn't seem realistic. So maybe we need to drop projects, and how would that, you know what I mean? Just something for us to chew on, because we'd have no time.
So, Madam Chair, absolutely, we can develop some recommendations. Here's my gut, though, Shane. So it's not the number of projects. The number of projects is a piece, but it's the amount of money that we're having to bill. So the complexity of the projects, the magnitude of the projects, the actual, money out the door, if you will, which is the challenge. Now, we will we'll come back to you with some recommendations. And what I think it'll look like is a smoothing. We'll smooth this out as to how do we deliver. If you recommend to the board, or if the board wants to stay with the same level of expenditure over the 20 years, what I'm going to do is look at the horizon to be 25 years. I mean, that's more realistic in terms of just the amassing of money and projects out the door. But even then, there has to be a deep understanding of the commitment we're all making to getting these things out the door. And you can see the magnitude here, right? You can see it. But I'll come back to you with some recommendations, and it could also be, hey, you might want to rethink, the magnitude of what we're doing here. We may want to scale it back to get a win, if you will, or at least assure us a better chance of winning. So with that, so this has been obviously this is now my life, and so this is what I do all day long, and all night long. The conversation that's been rattling around in my head is, what if we separated out for a minute, truly separated out the conversation with the voter for completion of RTA 1 versus RTA Next? Okay, and so here's what I'm thinking, right? We've been talking about the challenge if RTA Next is not approved. Okay, and the biggest challenge, I mean, immediate challenge in your face, is the transit component. Okay, we've pretty much, I don't have a final read on Sam's suggestion to maybe use some TPT fund balance beyond July 1 of 26, if for transit, at least until we can go to the voter, if it's not in March, right? My expectation is the answer is going to be no, we can't. Okay, that's my expectation, but we'll let Lisa Ann respond to that. So what other sources could we use for a transit transition, if you will, a gap funding for that? And so I've been thinking about it, and maybe there's a conversation to be had about the four projects that have been allocated to RTA Next, not deferred, allocated, right? And we've always talked about rescoping those, right? We've talked about, hey, we don't need what the voters were presented back in 06. We need to have another conversation. So maybe a discussion with the voter looks like this. Voter, we'd like to rescope these four projects. We would also like permission for a continuation of the transit component, that $32 million. And we would like some money for arterial reconstruction across the region. And that is a finite ask. Now, the question obviously then is, well, but I thought that the RTA had to could only go for 20 years. Okay. So I've got the attorneys looking at that because that would be in essence a modification of the existing plan and as opposed to a new plan. So we're having that conversation. I don't know the answer to that. But what's rattling on my head is this. We heard during the SALC presentation that pavement is a big deal. Potholes are a big deal. Pavement management, pavement maintenance condition is a big deal. So if we go to the voter and we have a conversation with them and say, look, we heard you, we understand, our survey reinforces that. And so maybe it's a conversation to say, we want to complete and deliver these 4 projects, rescoped, modified, and transit. Transit's important to the region. You saw the spreadsheet, so you know how important it is to pretty much the entirety of the region. And oh, by the way, we also hear the fact that you're concerned about pavement management. And so there's an arterial reconstruction component to that is distributed across the entirety of the region. Until such time as we can go back and have a conversation about the RTA next and develop the plan, massage the plan, whatever the plan looks like. So I'm not suggesting that, I'll call it the interim ask, is in lieu of RTA next. What I'm suggesting is it's a stopgap measure to have the open conversation. Shane's been kind of beating on me saying, hey, we need to have a conversation, be open and transparent with the voter, right? Which I agree. Well, maybe this is it. Maybe that's the conversation that we recommend to the board in March. And then my thought is, as soon as possible, we go back to the voter with an RTA next. Now, my suggestion would be that if an RTA next is approved, say in November of 26, November of 27, November of 28, whenever it is, that it would replace this interim ask. It would not be both. It would replace. So it's just something that I've been thinking about as a I'll call it a stopgap measure. It gives us time. It gives us time. It gives us a solution, right? But it gives us time, and the voters and their opinion is extremely important, and we've incorporated that. So that's one.
Jeff, then Terry and.
Thanks, Jan. I think Mike's going down a good direction. One thing that has been suggested and discussed is just transit as itself, taking that sunset off, and we know that mechanism may not be available to us at a countywide basis. But I think there could be some merits to separate transit from even this interim and have 2 different votes to where we don't have to go back and vote on transit again when you go for the RTA next. So I guess my thoughts is that separate the 2 different votes and kind of a RTA completion with the maintenance and then transit as a separate vote. But also I wanted to let you know, I do have to leave in 9 minutes, and I think Paul Kiesler will join at that point.
Thank you, Jeff. Terry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree with Jeff. I think that Mike might be onto something here. My only caveat in that is that obviously that means that some of these projects that are very important get pushed down the track a little ways. The further down we push those, the more problematic that becomes, because some of these projects are projects that were needed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, et cetera. So to push them out another 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, really makes it difficult. But I think that the theory, the idea behind it has a lot of merit. And so, yeah, I think there's some potential there.
Shane.
I echo those comments. We began a dialogue last week about thinking, in terms of, is there a different question that we could put to the voters in line with educating our public that we're serving on what's happened over the last 20 years, why we need to ask for this
Band-Aid, this interim piece.
this interim fix, right? To get these projects done, to still address current needs by way of pavement management. And quite frankly, to buy us time to iron out the RTA next plan. This is a problem if we try to push this to the voters in 2026. We just don't have time to address this stuff, in my humble opinion. And so what does success look like? In my mind, it looks like taking something to the voters with the idea of completing RTA 1 and addressing some pavement management needs, obviously the transit, and giving ourselves, taking the pressure off to give ourselves some time to figure out RTA next and to where we can all be a little more comfortable with it. I think that's going to satisfy the board's desire to have something in front of the voters in 2026. And I think their pressure point is not having that tax sunset, because it's obviously a lot harder to resurrect that if it closes. So I think it checks a lot of boxes off. We had talked a little bit about a hybrid approach last week, and so I think this is very much in line with that.
And I just say, I think part of it, the need for transportation and transit doesn't go away when we lose the funding source. So I think what this does is allow us to keep looking at responding to the need in some way and then figuring out the resources come in. Another issue that I've been kind of noodling with is I think we have learned a lot about what the language needs to look like in the ballot language. I mean, we've spent years looking at what those projects might be, but we've recently, I think, been informed about a way to say that on the ballot. And some of that is new. And we've all heard the TikTok that goes back to hitting a March election. And that makes me a little concerned about all of our need to scrub that with the lawyers and see exactly what that looks like. So this provides me, I think, the need to respond to the community by providing transit, by fixing the roads, by continuing with projects, and provides for the delineation, the articulation of a plan in various systems. So, Bill, and then back to Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree. I like the concept, Mike. My concern about going back and asking for an extension all along has been, if the majority of the projects are going to be done in the city of Tucson, does anybody else care? And that's not a good way to go in for a vote, but including transit and pavement maintenance in that gives everybody something. And I think that's a great idea.
We speak in the TMC, we've talked about both the science and the art of this process, right? And that the science is identifying the roads that need to be done. The art is making sure that there's something for everyone to vote for. Shane?
Thanks. The key gets back to, I think, whether or not we can put something other than a 20-year question in front of the voters. And so we'll have to figure that thing out.
Wait for it.
But let's say that it's a 10-year period, right, to complete all these projects. While this is not necessarily something that's part of the ballot question, I think amongst ourselves, that means that every other jurisdiction outside of the city isn't going to have any major corridor projects addressed. So is there something to consider for those other jurisdictions that aren't going to be able to have anything addressed? Is the question that is running through at that period of time.
Madam Chair, that's a really good point. And if it's a 10-year plan, I mean, this is really pushing things out and cramping our ability to do projects in our own jurisdictions. What about the PAG regional dollars? Is that something that we could put on the table that would be available to the jurisdictions that aren't going to have projects? I know pavement preservation, I will tell you that we have a pretty robust pavement preservation program. So I don't know that the town of Marana is going to benefit greatly from pavement preservation, and we aren't going to really have any projects in this. So I'm wondering if making the PEG regional money after 2029, because it's already dedicated till then, available to the local jurisdictions.
So first of all, thank you for the feedback. Appreciate it. as the interim executive director, I'm looking for interim solutions. So. All right, so let's go through these. I think there's some opportunities here. Terry brought up a great point about projects that are extremely important to your entities, and how do we work through that? I've got an idea there. So the way that I first was addressing this was through the RTA reconstruction, right? Because that's something everyone benefits from. I know, John, you'd provided something from the Pima County group about that. The SASLC survey or poll showed that. I know that some of the folks are really dealing with that. So my idea there was that we would take some chunk of the sales tax, of the money that's coming in, and we would allocate it for that function, for that pavement rehabilitation function. And my thought, at least initially, was we could distribute that based on, and there's a variety of different ways, but my preference, quite frankly, is almost to lean towards a distribution based on your current HERF distributions. And the reason I'm thinking that is because your current HERF distribution is based on a variety of things, but also includes population, lane miles, and point of sale. And so my thought is, if we put all of the regional money in a pot and then distribute it out in terms of percentage, right? That would give us an opportunity to identify a formula, right? That we would say to you, okay, as a region, here are the dollars that you could utilize for, and I'm going to start by saying RTA reconstruction. However, I also see an opportunity where those dollars could be used for HERF-like projects. So Terry just said their program for RTA reconstruction is pretty robust, and they don't have that need. You will when you're 200 years old, I'm sure, but right now you don't have that, right? So maybe that's a flexibility that's given to the entities to make a decision on how those dollars could be allocated, so that they could move some of the projects that are important to them forward. So that's an option. That's a thought. I don't have that worked out entirely, but that might be an option. The other option, obviously, we could distribute it by population. I could lock you all in a room and you guys could duke it out and then, come up with percentages. There's a variety of different ways to do it. We don't have any time for that, so we're not going to do that. But I think the key is what could resonate with the voter so that they understand. I don't want to overcomplicate this, right, into complex formulas and all that stuff. But how do we do this in a way that the voter could then react to it, right? So that's one. The second is Jeff mentioned maybe separating out transit and we'll call it transit and then completion of RTA 1+. That's a policy decision. I'll explore. I hadn't thought about that. The impression I got from Jeff's comment, I know he's gone, but the impression I got was that he was thinking maybe that becomes a longer term ask for transit. And then the short term ask is for the roadway element of RTA 1. That's a conversation we could probably have. I think that would at least give opportunity to separate those and not conflate those and potentially be a challenge. With regard to the regional dollars, I could also see a scenario where, the tip, and I know all the staff's here, could also be revised. And we could shorten the tip to try to address some regional projects that are necessary that we hadn't really identified a funding source. And so that would mean an extension of that voter ask. Maybe it's 8 or 10 years or even, longer. But keep in mind that the intent there is that we would go back to the voter with an RTA Next plan. We would go back to the voter in say 27 or 26, 27 or 28 once we have a game plan for the RTA Next component. And so that could be a way to get everybody a little something in terms of things that are important. We've all got needs across the board, but maybe that's an opportunity. I'm not advocating revising the tip, not at all. But I'm just suggesting if we can make the math work in terms of the time frame of the ask, right? And quite frankly, I wasn't thinking 10 years. I was thinking closer, 6 to 7 years. Just whatever we need for the RTA 1 projects to be completed, plus the sprinkling, if you will, of other cash. But if you think there might be an interest in 10-year ask, we could look at those and run those numbers. So I want to give those to you as thoughts on, it doesn't have to, I mean, it's not perfect, but it gives you opportunity to address some of the concerns that you all are expressing. Thank you.
Thoughts, comments?
Right.
I'm sorry, Shane.
Given if the intention in the intermediate ask of the public is to complete RTA 1 projects, I'm hard pressed to see that being accomplished in 5 years. I mean, realistically, maybe I could wrap my head around 10 years being done, somewhere between 5 and 10 years to be done with all those projects. That just seems to be a pretty long span for some of our agencies that got our initial projects done in period 1 and 2 and not being able to see anything of significance. And so, the maintenance money that's going to be sprinkled around, however we choose to use it, is not going to be stuff that you can get any kind of significant project done. It's going to be overlay or, mill and fill kind of thing. But, if the PAG dollars are available for these other agencies to go through the TIP process and be considered for projects of a little more significance, then that seems to resonate pretty well with me during that period of time. Anyway, thanks.
Madam Chair, I understand, and I think that when Terry was talking, Shane, you mentioned, okay, what do we look at maybe beyond 29? If we start studying or analyzing a 10-year horizon, I think that's the conversation. And I think we look at it and say, okay, what does it look like beyond that? Because, we're looking at somewhere between 40 and 45 million a year. You amass that over 3 years and you've got some talking money for some of these projects. And so that's I think, a part of the conversation. But I hadn't addressed one of the questions that you asked before, Shane, which is what happens if the attorney comes back and says you can't modify the plan and this whole thing, dries up, right? So I've got a potential thought that I'd like to explore with Jan, and she and I have talked a little bit about it. And that's, okay, if the RTA board can't ask for the election because we're bound by statutes, what if we go to the county and ask the county to call the election? So that's different than the conversation we had last week, which is Supervisor Hines had gone and asked the board for a unanimous vote of a sales tax, right? This is different. This would be the county calling the election for the county, basically, with the framework that we give them, we outline for them. And so it gives us more flexibility. And quite frankly, I like that a little better from the standpoint that the opportunity and the fungibility of those artillery reconstruction monies could be used for projects. And you could pool money but again, we could put the guardrails on it that's HERF-like, as opposed to what's dictated by the statute necessarily. So it's a little bit of a putting pressure on Jan, but I think that could be an opportunity for the county to help.
And to be clear, I think what we're talking about is bonding capacity. Or bonding in a sense. So I don't see it then as needing the baton to pass to the next, which is what we thought, at least I've been thinking in the past. We're doing a half cent to go to a half cent to end when another half cent comes in. And I think that this, if we do it, take something to the voters, it would be around a bond, I believe, election, I think, which makes it a little different, I think, in that the ability to have one continue and perhaps finish as another can start if we then do the RTA next half cent. I also have, and you all are with jurisdictions, I still have some homework to do on what it does to our expenditure limit. Because it would be a rather significant hitch in the giddy up if we did a bond, a HERF that would inure to the benefit to all the jurisdictions, but came only under our expenditure limit. But we're looking at, could we do it and then have IGAs, have agreements so that then that funding, that the projects get completed, but not eliminate, not hit our caps.
And so those are the pieces we'll work out. But I think there's a path there. That's my opinion, and I haven't formulated it entirely, but I think there's a conversation that can be had, and we'll call it the interim step or the intermediate step. And I think I wanted to present that to you and let you chew on that a little bit. The other thing that we'd like to do now is go back to the RTA next conversation. And I'd asked you all for, and your board members, some tweaks. I will provide you a definition of tweaks next time I give you that task. I will help you with that. I think it's important. But we do have that information. We have compiled it, put it into a package now. So I will turn it over to Rick to go over those. We'll start off with the tweaks. Yes. Let's do the 10% first. I think let's just do the 10% so we kind of put that out there. I think there's value. Yeah.
He said you could bring up the 10%, in the interest of keeping the data manageable. They want James to have all the fun.
As Rick's handing that out, this 10% conversation came out of the board meeting where there was concern. Maybe I think at this meeting as well, this group as well, where you all had asked for updated costs, and have we figured out, what the updated costs are for at least the July 1 of 26 or June 30 of 26. And so we just took a straight 10% inflation factor on both expenditures and revenues, and Rick's going to present the detail. Go ahead, Rick.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, as exactly Mike introduced, this is taking the RTA Next plan, formatted it, and it's isolating the 10%. So this is one of the comments that came up at the last meeting and discussion is, how would that look and what would that look like and why was 10% chosen? So in researching this with our cost consulting team, identify that kind of the current cycle we're in now, if we project out to the 2026 timeframe, the end of that fiscal year, this is about what we'd expect as a 10% increase. So on this particular format in the sheet you got coming with you, and we applied this to just the main roadway projects with some caveats. So the highlighted columns, or I'm sorry, the highlighted cells show you the ones that went up essentially that 10% number. The ones that aren't highlighted apply to the Sonoran Corridor, Cortero Interchange, Tangerine Interchange, and the two SR 210 projects. Throughout the discussion and the development of the draft plan, those were identified as fixed contributions. So this group had identified and said, we're going to cap those regardless of what the number is. So the companion funding column that shows you the committed non-RTA dollars, the left-hand side shows you what was in before. The second one shows you the one that's been increased. So that was adjusted 10% plus then the 10% on those fixed ones. So you get an overall net increase of 10. So if you're trying to do the math going, wow, that doesn't quite add up perfectly, that's how I did that formulaically. So you see how all those would go up. And the overall net increase is down at the bottom of the second page, where you see a 2467 number goes up to 2593. And then the non-RTA funding goes from 844 to 942. Roughly 100 million on that one. And then about 130 plus on the other one. So that's all that did is respond to that comment. What would happen if we adjusted for inflation to 2026? With that, Madam Chair, I can take any questions on that one, or I can move into the next ones if you wish.
Questions at this point?
Like our tweaking exercise, it only went,
So far.
but not surprising. That was
Yeah. Mike, the full one, next. Okay. Issa, if you could bring up the one that's the requested revisions. The one that's coming up and that's now on the screen. This is the second piece to it. And as Mike introduced, this is what tweaks look like. So these are all the comments that we incorporated, addressed, modified. I'll walk you through in kind of a highlight form so you can see what we did, but then I'll call attention to the bottom line page. I'm sorry, bottom line number on the second page. So you see highlighted all the aspects. I won't go through each one unless you ask me to. But so in some instances, like YUC Cortero, that was updated cost information provided by ADOT. So we were able to incorporate that. That applied to the 210 projects, Tangerine Road as well. So we were able to get that incorporated as part of their comments and feedback from the request. Project scope discussions and descriptions, as well as then offers for cost reductions and or cost increases on here. So to highlight a couple, from the Pascuyaki, they agreed to revise the description on that one to focus on all weather. So you see that number dropped a little bit, and then you see the accompanying scope description focused on that. So a couple other projects that had cost reductions that with the team and the submitting jurisdiction felt could be incorporated as you go down. The two big major changes that came out of multiple comments are down on projects 25 and 26. So project 25, Colossal Cave Road, this now incorporates the revised language provided from the county that allows some of the flexibility that responds to their technical concerns that were raised, as well as then some of the public comments and feedback that we heard during the outreach effort that Jenny and her team conducted. So we've been able to incorporate that, work that wording language in there, and get that incorporated in as an approved, as an improved description on that. The companion piece to that was the improvements, modifications to Marianne Cleveland Way. That's now been extended all the way out to tie into Colossal Cave. So that last 1.5 mile gap that was on the draft has been eliminated. And in doing so, we brought in the cost that was estimated from the county, as well as additional impact fees that they were able to identify on that. So you see both of those have been adjusted, and those received significant comments from the committee members. The other big change gets down to the modified scope projects, or the project modifications, which is on the bottom of this first page and then spills into the second one. So it was cleaning up the language a little bit and redefining. You've heard Mike refer to a number of times that deferring has a negative connotation on that. So we identified that a better definition on that would be project modification element, highlighting that these are scope changes to the 06 project or their remaining phases. I won't go through each one, but the general gist of it is the scope that we've been carrying on those 4 modified projects, and then allowing a little transition to show what was the original ballot, what are we after now, and bridging that gap so folks aren't confused or misunderstanding why we're making changes on that. And then a highlight at the bottom saying that's being driven by revised traffic projections and improved understanding of the needs and demands looking forward. So we've cleaned that up an awful lot. We incorporated the financial aspects and input provided from the county on the First Avenue project, which basically brought RTA fund to the tune of $1 million to offset the impact fees that were originally contributing to that project. So those are the major changes to those 4 scope modified projects and revised descriptions to accomplish that. Going into the safety ADA and the active transportation, as requested, we combined and increased into just pedestrian and bikeway. So it's all under now one giant category. Arterial reconstruction, Mike had looked into this and identified that we could administer it as a program. So felt that this would be more appropriate to identify it as arterial reconstruction for roadways in poor or failing condition. Don't need to call out any specific segments at this point in time for the voters, and then bump that up to a $60 million allocation, which is about $10 million per period on top of the $20 million allocation for the golf links.
Hey, Rick, let me just comment on that.
Please do.
Members of the group, I had asked the attorney to look at that because it was my understanding we had to identify the corridor when we're going to be working on a corridor. And she said that was not necessary as long as we call it out as arterial reconstruction. So we'll have to delve into what does that look like going forward, but at least we don't have to identify the corridor. So I did get clearance from the attorney on that. Thanks, Rick.
Good deal. Thank you. Moving down to the environmental elements, I highlighted the naming on this to be consistent with what we had utilized in the current plan. You saw just it was called before wildlife linkages, and wanted to make sure that that was incorporating the appropriate language on that, and then increase the amount to $50 million as per several comments. Moving down to the transit, address the high capacity transit improvements, redefine that one, took away the grant funding restriction. So it opens the door for the flexibility as you heard described last meeting. And then in addition, incorporated doubling the three other transit, the weekday, weekend, evening, weekend frequency, and the fixed routes. All those doubled, as well as then following South Tucson's comments to reestablish the amount from their previous allocation and incorporate it into the transit aspect. So the transit got a significant jump there as you see laid out.
Hey, Rick, let me ask about that.
Go for it.
Veronica, you had mentioned that at at the last meeting that you wanted to go to transit. We didn't know if it was just transit in general or specific to the city of South Tucson. So we left it identified as South Tucson, but I wanted to point that out. That can be lumped in with the others as well. So I'll kind of leave that up to you all to make a determination there. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Rick.
As you move down into the debt service, that was a lot of discussion on that, was the debt service reduction. I think most folks kind of wanted to see it drastically reduced, felt that a placeholder, and this goes back on conversations going all the way back to a year, felt that at least a placeholder would allow the board the flexibility should that choose to be utilized as a tool or technique going forward. At least there would be a line item budget number for it. So that was reduced from 65 down to 5. And then the contingency, there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting without any real reconciliation. So we left it there as per the current amount, which is just the 25 million number. As you can see at the grand totals at the bottom, we go from 2,466 to 3 million. So we now have a new definition numerically of what tweaks means. I'm going to use that with my financial managers. The last two columns, though, I think are worth calling your attention to because these are the increases in the non-RTA revenue. We go from 845 million to 1.9 billion in anticipated need. That would primarily come in the form of the regional fund distribution through ADOT. That's kind of, I guess they call it the RAC funds, which I don't know exactly what that's referred to, but it's the allocation that comes to the region that can be used on the state highway system. So that's hitting that awfully, awfully hard with a very big price tag on that. And that's driven by the accompanying cost adjustments and updates that were provided and carrying that all in the other non-RTA revenue category. I know I flew through that awfully fast, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I can be answer any questions you have or go back on anything you wish clarified.
Thank you, Rick. So a few things to highlight. I think Jeremy, you had mentioned the cost increases for particularly SR 210 and really the ADOT projects in general. One of the questions that is running around in my head is we did not increase our contribution much, if you will, not in comparison to the percentage of cost increase. Is it realistic that those projects could still go forward given the we'll call significant increase in cost?
I think they could go forward. You know, like Rick had mentioned, you know, talking about the RAC monies that we get, you know, through PAG to ADOT, you know, on average, it looks like, you know, we're getting anywhere from 130 to maybe 160 million around the November timeframe that we try to, you know, find a home for and obligate to a project. But if you look at, you know, that first stage 1 and 2 of 210, you know, it's in the $600 million range. I mean, just let's just assume on average 150. I mean, that's a 4-year gap of funding that we, you know, we'll have to add and then save up the next year, and then start then trying to move forward with the design and then go out to construction because we got to get the money in before we can start authorizing it to get a designer on board. So I think it can move forward. It's just going to limit pretty much to one project. Like all those rack funds will be obligated to that project.
So, committee, I think that's a pretty important conversation to have. Because if you're looking at state dollars of 1.1 billion or in excess of 1.1 billion dollars for that corridor and our contributions in the 50 million range, that it really doesn't get them there, right? And so I think it's important, much like the regional funds that we talked about earlier, if we focus on these projects, and it's, by the way, on the list, it's 11 and 18. If we focus on those projects, basically it shuts down everything else in the entirety of the region for an extended period, as Jeremy said. So it's something to think about. Don't need a decision right this second, but I think it's important that we consider that and really rethink those projects and the need for them as a region. The other thing I wanted to mention, so Sam and Christina, based on the feedback we got from you, we went ahead and incorporated that. Obviously and clearly that changes the chemistry of the entire program. Understood the need, or understand the need for it. My suggestion would be that we not do that, obviously, unless we're going to go back and rethink the entirety of the program. Because that's about a $500 million increase. And at this point, there's no way for us to address that short of redoing the plan. And so I don't know what your thoughts are there. And I realize that's a policy conversation that you all are having. But I do think it's important. I wanted to show it so you can see the impact. But it is important to understand that if we're trying to get this moved forward, we're going to have to rethink that quite a bit and what impact that has on the entirety of the program.
Okay.
It's real quick. I just wanted to note, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the spreadsheet that we just reviewed, which incorporates all the proposed changes that have been communicated to this point, these have not been trued up with the 2006 numbers or 26 numbers.
26,
right?
That's correct.
So that's going to have an impact as well. It might be good to
Yeah.
somehow consolidate that.
We will, and that direction was mine. I said, you know what, let's separate them so that you've got, like compartmentalized thinking, right? Linear. So that way you see them and the impact in all basically the same format, if you will, that we had before. So you can see compared to that 2.466, what does that mean? And then we'll add to that the 10% and that. There were a few other comments that you all mentioned, which are not project related. I'm going to call them policy. Now, I'll start off by saying, Sam, I think in your and Christina, your commentary, you had mentioned, I think your first comment was increasing the percentage of allocation to the city. We did not address that directly, only because I wanted to see where all the dust settled. And then we could come back to that. But that's not addressed in here specifically because I wanted to see based on the tweaks and what all that looked like. And then we could come back and have that discussion. So I wanted to, I'm not trying to be disrespectful and ignore it. I just wanted you to know we addressed it, but it's not addressed in any change to the plan at this point. Okay. So I'll turn it over. Who's going to handle those? Rick, are you ready to go over those? So these are, we'll call them policy level thoughts that you all had. And we wanted to address those as well and give you some ideas on how to move those forward.
He said this would be the comments and responses. Just so to add on to what Mike said, this is basically the recapitulation of what we shared at the last meeting with all of our responses, how we incorporated that or how we saw the discussion. In the far right-hand column is what's important to note. So we did go through, and as you saw, we addressed a great number of these. We were able to incorporate that. You saw the results of that discussion. There are several that as we were looking at it and working on it in the last week that we identified would be associated and really kind of addressed, and hopefully we captured that with the cash flow analysis and the burn rate discussion. So some of those fell into that conversation as well. There are some that we identified that are going to be, and you heard it alluded to at the last meeting, but as we did a deeper dive into it, we recognize those are going to be addressed through the various code revisions. The admin code POPs that we talk about, that was the companion document that was developed back in 2006. We know that's going to be coming as an update effort on that. So we know going forward, we're going to be working together with various policy subcommittees, efforts, experts on that to make sure that that's been updated and captures a lot of this discussion as well. I can go through each and every one just to show how we do it. I'm trying to give it as a high clip in the interest of time, but Madam Chair, I can certainly follow your lead on that. We did identify some of these where there was a kind of an open topic comment. It was very hard to incorporate just flat out and plug it in. So we identified some of those where there could be discussion needed if so desired by this group. We wanted to at least highlight that, bring it to your attention that we reviewed every single comment we received. We incorporated what we could, where we could, or identified where it will be a follow-up action, or identified where we can prompt that up for discussion here. You will notice a few others had the designation on there of partially addressed. So those were ones where there was discussion that was happening, such as the reduction or elimination of contingency. Well, not everybody was on board with that, or debt service, but we did reduce it to some degree. Or we increased the allocation to pavement reconstruction. We didn't bump it up to the highest number that was identified, but we acknowledged the spirit and the intent. So that's why you'll see that designation of partially addressed, that we kind of had to use a judgment call on that based on the comments, feedback from the other committee members.
Thank you.
So this shows the nature, how we handled, what we looked at, and the action that was taken for all the comments that were provided by this committee, as well as General Maxwell as the board member. So with that, Mike, I can follow your lead on anything else you want to go, or Madam Chair, answer any questions as a follow-up to that.
Thank you, Rick. So I wanted to point something out. You'll see a lot of on that far right column where it says addressed. That means it's been included, and we talked about it in the plan, that other spreadsheet we showed you. Now, what that does though is it puts us out of balance. And so what we will do for the board, to come back to them, I'm going to have to balance that. So I don't necessarily just want to throw it out to them. So I will, for your next meeting, I'll come back with some recommendations on how to make that balance. And you'll probably see two different spreadsheets, one with the recommendation on all of these, and then another that includes the 10%. So you can kind of see how that all shakes out. So that's the first thing. The second thing is when we look at some of these that discussion needed, that's exactly what it means, right? Is we need to talk through those. But I don't know that we need to talk through those today. I think those are conversations, depending on the direction of the board for RTA Next, we can have those conversations down the road. I don't think they're as important right now for the generation of a plan and at least developing, hopefully, a consensus on a plan to move that forward. So I just wanted to point those out. Some of those are pretty meaty issues, but I don't know that they're like extremely important for the current conversation of developing the plan.
Same. Feedback.
I'll provide a little feedback. Mike, and to staff, this is just a tremendous amount of information and work. So thank you for putting that in such a way that we can wrap our heads around it. So I really appreciate that. As we wrestle or grapple with the unbalanced plan as we look at these changes, there are two suggestions from the town of Sarita, Oro Valley, and Marana that might have cost implications and help. So, to whatever extent that's on the table, I think that also bodes well for that exercise. So thanks.
Yeah. I'm just saying.
Mike, I just wanted to ask, will you send these out? Is there some place that we
Yeah.
can access these digitally? And then is it possible to get the actual Excel file for this last one you handed out? This one here with all the changes?
You want Excel?
Yeah.
So you can change it?
So we want to play with the man.
Of course, of course.
Don't send it to him.
Of course I will. Of course. And we'll, and by the way, again, in a perfect world, you'd have gotten these a week ago and that, we were working on these this morning. So as we get these, we're going to get them out, but we'll get them to you in whatever format you'd like. Happy to help you with that. And by the way, I hope that this will give you opportunity to brief your electeds, you know, so that they can be well versed in what we're up to and what we're doing, keeping them in real time. So that when they come in here, they've at least heard and seen some of this stuff. They're not going to change radically between our last TMC meeting and the board meeting, but I think it gives you an opportunity, at least a framework for them.
Kurt, did you have something or no? Okay.
So Madam Chair, unless anything else from the staff, did we miss anything? Is there anything else that's needed? Anybody in the district?
I just wanted to ask, when is the next board meeting? I
It's
just.
31st.
Thank you.
Great segue. So, so let's kind of talk through the game plan here that again is rattling in my head. So I kind of sprung on you this idea of this interim or intermediate solution this morning. And, you know, there's a lot of pieces to that and there's a lot of complexities that we obviously need to work out very, very quickly, right? So at the risk of over meeting you all, what do you think about getting together before next Wednesday? So remember, we committed to getting together Wednesday, every Wednesday until we get this thing done, right? But that gives us no time between our next meeting and then the board meeting on Thursday. So I'd like to pitch an idea that would either gather us on Friday or on Monday, the following Monday. And you know, we'll make ourselves available to whatever time works for you so that you're not, we're not faced with, you know, some of the challenges of the time frame. Okay. Before you answer that, let's talk about the homework here and kind of where we're headed with this. So, you heard me mention, our commitment was to get back to the board with the response to the tweaks. So we'll do that. We'll have a recommendation. It'll be, you know, cleaned up a little bit and we'll have that ready to present to the board. So that's number one. Number two, I would like to work on some ideas and some thoughts for this intermediate or this interim solution so that the board can weigh in on that. At that point, I'm hopeful that the attorney has given guidance on, can we do this and how do we do it? And you know, whether it's RTA board asking, or is it the county board calling the election? What are the challenges there and what are the opportunities there? But I'm going to need help with identifying the detail of that so I can present it to the board on the 31st. And so I think it needs to be a little bit of an iteration there of, you know, some of the concepts I gave you and thought through and incorporating some of your thoughts. I'm happy to take a stab at that and I'm happy to bring it back to you. It'd be great if we could get a few of you to at least look at it with me or for the team. And then we come back to the group and report. The last thing, I think it's subordinate, but I think it's important, is maybe inviting, Terry had suggested maybe inviting Alejandro or somebody else to come and have a conversation from that industry perspective, or at least from their set of eyes. I think that's absolutely valuable. And again, it's the entirety of the team. So I just throw those out to you in terms of some thoughts as we prepare for the 31st will be a big meeting. And I think it's going to be important that we have our ducks in a row at that point.
My guess is that the entire group is ready, willing, and able to do whatever we need to do to get this done and get a recommendation to the board. The question is simply, people have a lot, and I don't know. Yeah, how do we just get a poll out to everybody and pick a time, Friday or Monday, and whichever one seems to get the most of us here, we'll convene and we'll have as much support and help as we can. Does that make sense?
Happy to buy you lunch, happy to buy you breakfast.
Oh, I mean, cocktails. That's right.
Madam Chair, I was gonna suggest if you could send out a poll so we could figure out when we're available.
Without objection, that's what we'll do, is just get out to y'all and see how quickly we can get together on Friday or Monday or what needs to happen. we may need both. I don't know, to really get a working session and get this going in some time. Because we have got a heavy lift for the board. Lunch and dinner. Sweet rolls. Okay,
And by the way, that's a great suggestion. Maybe as a placeholder, we'll try for both Friday and Monday. So that because I need to notice them. And so if I can notice them, and then even if we cancel them, that's okay. But the staff is sending that out now, so you're going to get that here in the next few minutes. So if you can just respond quickly so that we can get this thing moving, we'll go from
I
there.
think that's it. I think my recommendation, we'll figure it out and notice both days and then see which one we need. Poor Shane. Those 410s, right? You got it Friday completely open.
It's going to be camping.
It could be Saturday.
That's right.
It could be.
Okay.
Yeah, because you
What I heard.
Saturday.
Oh. Yeah, we were looking forward to Saturday. What else have you got for us
Crazy,
today?
crazier things have happened.
I
We
know.
could meet on you guys are up for, we come on a weekend too. That's
That's,
all good.
We're committed.
we're fine. Yeah, again, speaking for the group, I think we recognize this has got to get done. And we have a very short window to do it. And if it's Friday, Monday, if we figure out on Friday, we're here on Saturday or Sunday, we'll do it.
Anything else from the team? Miss anything? Everybody else?
Right, miss anything else on the agenda?
All right, great.
All right, thank you all. Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.